You've decided that you want to actually plan a novel. Maybe you just can't keep coming up with what happens next in the moment of writing, or maybe you keep coming up with too many messy stories. You want to know at least roughly what happens from beginning to end. But then you come to ask yourself, what goes into this plan? What do I put in it? Do I come up with the story arcs, the character arcs? Like, what is my focus with this plan? And I think that's the key thing that you need to understand. The focus. I'm going to give you 5 tips on what you should focus on when you start planning. So come with me. Some would say that the endings are the most important point of the book. It's the last thing that your audience is going to feel or think about when they close that page. And that feeling that they're going to have at the end is really going to be the feeling that they're going to have over the course of the book. Not many people actually remember too much about the book over the course of the time, just that they're enjoying it. But when they get to the end, if it feels satisfying or if it feels like it's earned, then they are going to feel like that whole book is best. And sometimes the ending is the whole point of the novel. It's the message or the kind of feeling that you want your reader to come out with. And so like every scene and every bit of the novel is kind of building up to that crescendo. Those books can be quite satisfying to the reader as they feel everything coming together. So why don't you just start there? Why don't you start at the ending of your story? Think about what you actually want the reader to feel, or what you want the plot to crescendo at, and start there. Make like a line or a paragraph that comes to that fruition. It doesn't really matter what the actual ending is, I don't think, whether it's heroic or sad or melancholy. You just want an idea of what the whole plot is culminating to. And then once you have that sentence or paragraph or what the ending is, then you work backwards. Yeah, you think of the scene that logically comes before that. How did the character get to that ending? Or how did the people that are in your story get to that point? How did the plot get to there? And then what you're doing is kind of jumping back. Okay, what's the scene before that? What happens in that scene? A sentence or a paragraph. And then you guessed it, you go again. You jump back to the next scene, and then the next scene, and you keep going reverse, reverse, reverse until you get to a maybe start point of the novel. One of the problems that writers have is that what happens next question. Even when you're wanting to plan a novel, just keep thinking of like, oh, what is this scene? What is this chapter? What is this moment gonna be? Can be like killer. Even when you're outlining, even when you're just doing it by bullet points, it can be quite a creative load on your brain. So when you're like working backwards, it's kind of like a game that you're playing. It's like you kind of know what happens because you've already made it. You already know what happens at the ending, or you already know what happens at that scene. And you're making the game of like, well, how does that happen? What are the steps, or what are the processes that allow that scene to happen? And then you've already got the steps and understanding of that scene, and so you're making the other scene of like, how do you get to that? And so like, even though the reader is going to see the chain going this way, actually you as a writer are making the chain that way. It's kind of like you're reversing a DeLorean into the story. I know that's not how DeLoreans work, but let me have that simile. That's my key point for the first thing you should focus on. Focus on the ending first and work your way backwards. And I think you'll find that it's actually surprisingly easy once you do it that way. One of the mistakes I made when I started outlining, and it was a mistake that I kept on making pretty much until recently, is that when I was outlining, I was focusing on plot. And you might think, hang on a minute, isn't that the point of outlining? Isn't it the point to kind of focus on plot? Well, kind of. See, the problem I was encountering with my stories when I focused on plot is that they actually felt quite mechanical. I seemed to only care when I was writing about like the fight that was gonna happen, or the revolution that was about to take place, or the crazy riot that was gonna take place. And what really the criticism that I kept coming back with is that I don't feel that. I don't feel the danger of the fight. I don't feel the craziness of the revolution. I don't feel the why the riot kept on happening. Well, yeah, I had a lot of riots back in my stories. And what I found out is that the fight, the revolution, the riot, those things don't really matter unless the character cares or feels something about them. You don't feel like the danger of the fight until the character feels the danger, until you understand, this could be life or death. You don't feel the craziness of the revolution until the character comments or is in the middle of it. They could be in danger, or maybe they're looting and they feel the freedom of it, or maybe they're scared to death because they're behind the door and they think that they're gonna get killed by one of the revolutionaries. You don't care about the riot for the same thing until the character that you're following, or maybe even the narrator you're following, cares about that particular moment. The reader isn't going to care. I think I see the problem of this a lot of times when people do outline focusing on the plot. They understand that there's something missing and they can't seem to get why that is the case. Hang on a minute, I've got this crazy plot of a revolution and yet my readers are saying they don't care about that. And I think the key point is that when you're outlining, you can't be outlining just on plot alone. You have to think about what the character is feeling about this. You have to think about what the character opinion on this, or where they are in this scene. In the revolution example, are they the ones causing the revolution? And so what are their feelings? Why are they causing this revolution? Or are they behind the door hoping that the revolution doesn't come to them? Those are two completely different stories. Those are two completely different opinions on the revolution that are going to happen. And by putting what the character feels about that, you are inputting what the reader kind of should feel about that revolution. And this makes your scenes have a lot more strength, have a lot more emotion, have a lot more impact for you, because the reader will understand the emotions and the feelings that the character is feeling in the revolution part of the story, and they will understand the craziness and the plot point that will come from it. So yeah, make sure that when you're outlining, focus on the character. The tip I have for this is, what are the questions you're going to ask in the story. Now, to give you an example, one of the most obvious genres about asking questions is the mystery genre. A lot of those novels are basically based on the very simple question of who killed this person? And the other question that they could ask is why did that person get murdered? But it doesn't stop there. That isn't the only question that that mystery novel is asking. In each chapter or in each scene, it's asking like, will the detective find clues in this place? Will the detective crack that interviewer and get more information? Or near the end, will the detective find out who is actually doing it before they murder again? You can use those questions that a mystery novel into other genres. For example, the romance genre. What is the question that's being asked there? Is like, will these two people get together? In the adventure novel, it might be, will the adventurers get to a certain place in time? In a science fiction novel, it might be, is this technology good? And it doesn't even have to be grand questions that you ask of the novel. In each scene, there should be a question that you want to answer in that scene. In the romance genre, you might want to ask, like, can the girl ask the handsome hunky guy? So, when you're outlining your stories, you want to understand what question you're asking in that scene. And there's a surprising twist, it doesn't just stop there. You also want to ask, why is the answer hard to get? See, just having a question on its own isn't going to be enough. Like, a mystery novel doesn't just answer who killed the person. The answer is going to be hard to get. In a mystery novel, it takes the whole novel of like interviews and finding clues and going through different horrible bits to get the answer to that question. And in your novel and in your scenes, you also want that. You also want to find out why the answer to that question is not going to be easy. You don't want to answer that question easily. So, in your outline, what you need to do is not only ask what is the question you're asking in the scene, you also want to come up with a few reasons of why the answer is hard to get, and you need to put like obstacles or frustrations in the path of getting to that answer. And I guarantee you that once you have that in your mind, what is the question and how is the answer hard to get, your storytelling, like mine, will go right up into the stratosphere. You'll find that readers suddenly become engaged with your story and want to turn the page. Now this next tip is a little bit more ephemeral and a little bit harder to get concrete because it's all about your strengths and weaknesses, and unfortunately I don't know your strengths and weaknesses. I know mine. After a few of the stories that I completed, short stories and like maybe a few of the novels that I completed, I started to understand that there were a few elements of the story that actually came from my brain quite easily. I came up with the thoughts and the feelings that the characters had like quite easily. It just felt like it came naturally from my brain to my fingers. But there were a few things that didn't come so naturally to me, like what the conflicts or the tensions of the scenes are, or like what the descriptions of like the room or like the place were. Like, I found a lot of those elements really a struggle to get out with, and I found those moments when I was writing those elements just like a slog. That's where I think this tip comes in. What you want to do is, in your outline, you want to understand what your weaknesses are, like what really takes a lot of time to come up with, and you want to prep those scenes. And really, you don't want to worry about the strengths of your writing. The reason why you don't really worry about your strengths is because it's kind of like double duty. If they come naturally to you, you don't really need to think about them, so you can kind of leave that to the writing when it comes to it. But the things that are you're weak at, or the things that you really struggle with, those are the things that make writing a slog. Those are the things that, like, it just makes you go, ugh, why do I have to make up this description? Oh, I have to make it up while I'm writing it. It's hard. And so you want to make those points as easy as possible. You want to make your life as easy as possible. And by preparing the things that you're weak at, like for me, I will come up with like a few descriptions or like a few words and maybe a little bit of like a feeling of what the character is feeling about this room or this place that they're at. By having those like words and little descriptions already there for me, it makes my life when I start writing that a lot easier. So that's the thing that you need to think about. When you're planning, keep in mind your strengths and weaknesses and prepare in your plan things that will help those weaknesses become a little easier. When you start learning writing, maybe you do like an online course, or maybe actually like do like a physical college course, you start to learn the structures of storytelling. You know, the 3-act structure, like how every scene should have a rise, a climax, and a forward. Or you may even kind of learn how what the hero's journey is. In my opinion, those can be useful things to know. It can be useful to know like the 3-act structure or the hero's journey, and it can be useful for like a newer writer to kind of like take one of these structures and kind of fill it in yourself. Like you may have like a vague idea or a story that might fit into one of these structures, and so you like take it and you like fill it in yourself and you make a story, and that can be great like practice or like learning how to write. But the one thing that my tip kind of advises against is the reliance on these structures. And I feel a lot of writers and a lot of authors may put these things into more importance than they actually are. They may say that, oh, every story has to follow the 3-act structure religiously, or every story is following the hero's journey religiously. And once you start reading, maybe even watching, or like doing anything, once you start engaging with stories and reading them, you'll know that's rubbish. Not every story follows these things exactly religiously. Not every story will be successful because they followed the hero's journey. And I think a lot of writers I see in some communities don't understand that, and they think that, oh, if I put in exactly what's in the hero's journey, I will get successful like Star Wars did. So the thing you need to understand, like with hero's journey, and I think all these like act structures kind of fit in the same mold. So with the hero's journey, it was made by Joseph Campbell, and he was like a anthropologist. He was seeing these kind of different stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh or like Beowulf, and he kind of noticed, hang on a minute, there's a few things in here that seem very similar. Why is a story like 3,000 years old kind of similar to a story that's like 2,000 years old, and they're completely different cultures? It's interesting. He felt that was interesting, and so Joseph Campbell, what he did is that he looked into it. He looked, is there like these similarities? And he found out that yes, there was all these similarities, and that's why he made the hero's journey. He made this structure of the hero's journey to kind of explain why all these stories had similarities. But the thing you have to remember is that the guy or woman that made Gilgamesh or made Beowulf, they weren't thinking that. They were just thinking, how do I make the story of Beowulf epic and interesting to the people that I'm telling it to the fire? They weren't thinking about the hero's journey. They weren't thinking of the zoomed out structure that they had to have in the stories. They were just naturally telling that Beowulf story. And that's the thing that you have to keep in mind. A lot of these structures are made after the fact of stories. They're not really made before the story. And I know, like, you have Hollywood and a lot of authors kind of suggesting that you probably should follow these structures religiously or whatever, but I don't agree. I think if you do that, you'll make cookie cutter stories, you'll make emotional stories. Like I said before, you'll make stories that people don't really care about. Yes, the hero's journey did work for Star Wars, and George Lucas has said that he made Star Wars in mind because of the hero's journey. But when people watch Star Wars, they weren't caring about that. They weren't caring about what the structure of Star Wars. They were caring about the characters and how Luke or Han Solo, how a lot of these, the actions they made came from those characters, and a lot of emotions came from those characters. What writers should do, I think, and it comes back to like tip 2, is understand your characters and follow them. I think readers will care about the character, and if the action comes from the character, they will feel that it does, and they will be satisfied, or they'll be interested in that outcome and what happens after the character makes that decision. One of the reasons why I think Star Wars works is not because it uses the hero's journey, it's because, like, Han Solo, you know what character he is. You know he's a smuggler and he only cares about money, but you also know there might be like a sensitive side to him. And so it's satisfying in the story that when Han Solo comes back and saves the people, that comes from the character that we know. It's a surprising, but it's also inevitable. And I think that's what writers, when they're thinking of stories, should think about. So yes, don't totally rely on these structures. Good training wheels, but like with all training wheels, eventually you have to take them off and make stories in a new way. And there you have it, the 5 tips that, if you follow them, will make you understand what you should put in your plan and make the act of planning easier. I hope these tips have been useful for you. If you find these tips useful, please like it, and until next time.